to another episode of Subject to Interpretation, a podcast which takes us deep into the topics that matter to professional interpreters. I'm your host, Maria Ceballos-Wallis. Welcome. I hope to cover topics from theory to practice. In other words, there is an ideal of how things should be done or are done, and the reality of how things actually function in the real world. So, our guests are people who have tried successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully to bridge that gap in interpreting and translating. This program is recorded via Zoom in both video and audio format. Today, we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on the livelihood of interpreters and small businesses serving the industry and explore just what the new normal may look like for us going forward. This is our second episode in our brand new series, and we're going to continue our conversation with veteran interpreter and entrepreneur, Agustin de la Mora. Welcome,
Hello.
Agustin.
Hi, Maria. How you doing?
I am doing well. So, Agustin, let me give our audience a little bit of background on you. Although they've heard from
Okay.
you before, they do not know everything there is to know about you. You have been in the industry for over 28 years,
Mm-hmm.
and 11 of those years you spent as a supervising court interpreter of the Ninth Judicial Circuit in Orlando, Florida. And this
Mm-hmm.
is where you currently reside. You
Correct.
also, as a federally certified court interpreter and as a state certified court interpreter, have been a consultant for the administrative offices of the state courts and a rater for both state and federal exams, correct?
That's correct.
And you have actually, in my opinion, left your mark indelibly on orientation training programs for more than 15 states. 50 would be nice, but
That
15
that we're shooting for 50.
but
Yeah,
more than 15 states, and that really is quite a lot. So you are a pioneer not only in interpreter training, but you're also a pioneer in the development of remote interpreting systems
that's
for which
correct.
you worked in various states as
Hmm.
early as 2009. So what did I miss?
That's true. I started as an interpreter, and I didn't know much about it, but I found some people that took me under their wing and taught me about interpretation. I was very familiar with training, and so that was a kind of a simple marriage for me to realize there's no training going on whatsoever, and uh, we need it desperately. I know how to do training, but I don't know about interpretation. So I commingled with these colleagues of ours who are still my friends for many years, and that's the advantage. Then I got hired as a chief interpreter for the Ninth Judicial Circuit Court to create a program. They did not have an interpreter department. Funny enough, they had interpreters for many years, but always as freelancers. So they wanted to have a program. So I went from just being an interpreter to now manage an interpreter program for the Ninth Judicial Circuit Court. And while I was there, um, in about 2009 or 10, we started talking about remote interpreting. And I was part of the team that put together the first true remote interpreting system in the courts here in Orlando many years ago. And as a result of that, I actually ended up leaving the courts and work and opened a company called Remote Interpreting. And so, yes, I've been a manager, I've been an interpreter, I continue to be an interpreter, and I really cannot emphasize that enough. To this day, I go to court as often as I can and interpret because I want to keep up my skill, but also I'm I'm an interpreter at heart. I like interpreting, and so I continue to do that. So no, you didn't miss much. I just kind of expanded a little bit on it.
Well, there you go. So, as an interpreter, I'm imagine that the last couple of months since the COVID pandemic began, you must have seen a large reduction in the volume of the work that you do in court, as many other people have.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I only interpret in federal court now. I don't do state court, and I could do a lot more interpreting, but I'm very busy training people. For the last 20 years, I moved little by little to more be an instructor and an educator than an interpreter, but I kept up my skill. So I didn't notice it as much personally. But yes, the federal court closed down completely for a while. So we went from some calls to zero calls, right? But I did notice that many of our students who are freelancers started calling us and say, "Hey, listen, man, they closed the courts. The attorneys are not doing depots. what are we supposed to do? And I said, study. uh,
Now,
let's
did
get
that, but
prepared.
now regarding that answer, I mean, it is true. Although you say it in tongue in cheek that
Right.
when you can't get out of the house, you need to keep your mind occupied. But
Yeah.
as a business owner, and in this industry, we have lots of small business owners. As
Mhm.
a business owner, how have you seen yourself affected?
Well, we were affected dramatically. I mean, when in March, I remember it as it was yesterday. I came back from a trip and to attend the conference for CHI in San Diego in March, and it was the very beginning. It was the beginning of March. Actually, I think I got there at the end of February, and it was just talk. Oh yeah, this virus and whatever, but there was nothing really. Um, s- Being the United States had not been hit so hard yet, right? So when I came back, I remember getting starting to get calls from other states where I had already planned to do some
Mhm.
training, and it was cancellation after cancellation. I'm sorry, we're canceling, we're postponing. At the very beginning, we thought it was going to be a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks. We're going to move it a month. So that's how it started. But it was a dominoes effect. Within days, we had zero clients
Wow.
that were doing anything with us, for a while. And it was rough. And then, of course, we noticed that the number of people attending our classes went down significantly. And when we started talking, we found out, of course, that there was just because people were not working and the courts were closed and they had no income. So it's been a tough ride for interpreters. I would assume, for medical interpreters, it's interesting because you would think that would be super busy, and they were kind of super busy. But then again, there was for a while a panic on the hospitals that they didn't want anybody to come from the outside world into their hospitals, so they were not bringing freelancers at all. They relied heavily on remote interpreting. Video remote interpreting became very, very strong very quickly in the medical field because of that.
Well, it sounds, Augustine, like to me, and also in my professional practice, it sounds to me that although everything kind of closed in on itself, slowly there was this little light that started opening, and
Sure.
it leads us back to remote interpreting, which is
Absolutely.
is
It's
is really
interesting.
is really quite incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it is because when I introduced remote interpreting to the courts was for a completely different reason. Obviously, my theory has always been that the courts had limited themselves to using unqualified, uncertified interpreters with the excuse of, well, we don't have one here. And I'm not going to call Maria from Georgia and pay for a plane ticket to come to Los Angeles for a 15-minute hearing. And the courts will never go for this, blah, blah, even though they should. That's their mandate, but maybe that'll be another podcast. But uh, bottom line is, my intent was we do have some qualified interpreters or certified interpreters in other states. So I understand you don't want to fly them in. Let's bring them in remotely. And the effort was to create something as seamless as it is now, but with technology of 20 years ago or almost 20 years ago. And we were successful. I mean, we had a very good remote interpreting system. We actually were able to do simultaneous over a phone line, which was never heard of. Still to this day, nobody can do it that I know of.
Hmm.
So we could do simultaneous, consecutive, and side because we could send papers via a secured site. So, but at that time, we found a lot of resistance. We found resistance because of cost, because at that time the machines were new. We're putting them together literally in my office, and they were expensive. And many of our colleagues were very resistant
Hmm.
because they said, no, 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 in-person interpretation, we don't want to be replaced by machines. And that was never my intention. I actually was trying to give more jobs for qualified and certified interpreters than they had. Because if I'm a certified Somali interpreter and I live in Minnesota and now I can be all over the country doing video, that would be like a good thing, I thought. But there was
Hmm.
a lot of resistance. There was, and understandably, mistrust from our colleagues that thought, well, the courts are not going to see this as I'm going to use it when it's absolutely necessary, but I'm going to use it as a cost cutting measure.
And that's something that worries
Yeah,
interpreters a
of
lot, isn't
course.
it?
Of course.
Because video remote interpreting in particular is not new to ASL interpreters, to
Correct.
sign language interpreters. They've been using it, maybe not as much for court, but they've been using it for pretty much everything,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everyday endeavors, whether it's making a medical appointment or paying
Sure.
a bill or ordering a pizza. But for us, spoken language interpreters, it was a completely new dynamic. Um, do you what had to happen? I mean, I think it's obvious that that COVID happened, but it seems like it's technology wise something had to happen to really make remote interpreting more than a pie in the sky idea and make it completely available to anyone.
Right. Well, I mean, we saw it when we had our company. We saw it coming, and I told them, machines are not going to be doing this for a long time. This is going to become a software solution, and it did. And as many of our listeners might know or not, I mean, Zoom, which is by far the most advanced platform there is right now, has a feature already where you can do simultaneous interpretation via Zoom. And that was
Absolutely.
my dream. Had I had the money that the Zoom investors had, maybe I would have come up with it. But bottom line is that is a game changer to a certain degree, because we still had to convince the interpreters that it was not a an attempt to get them unemployed or to be replaced by machines. But I have to be honest, even to this day now, you say things are starting to open up quite a bit. They are. For the last 3 or 4 months, we started hearing, oh, I have a depot via Zoom. I have a court appearance via Zoom. So people are starting to accept the fact that, hey, I can do this. But of course, what some of our colleagues were a little afraid of is happening, because there's push from the also now we don't have to pay you the 2 hour minimum because you're doing it via Zoom, right? And I told one of the attorneys who told me that, also, you mean that now instead of $600 an hour, you're going to charge $60 an hour because you're doing it via Zoom? And they
And
go, oh
that's
no,
what
no, the rates didn't change. I didn't understand why ours should. But the bottom line is there was some truth to the fact that some people might think that, oh, this is a way to save money and to pay less to the interpreter. So we're still fighting with that, because uh, with this pandemic, it has proven it's an effective method. It can be done. It works for deposition. It works for even trials. It can be done in the simultaneous mode. You can send secure communication for papers, for site translation. It can be done. But now the next fight, or the next battle, is going to be to convince that, not because we're using technology, the professionalism and the requirements of being a good certified court interpreter went
Mhm.
downhill. So that's probably our next battle. But yes, people are getting used to it and starting to use it a lot more often.
It sounds to me like it's gone from being a choice to a necessity.
Yep.
And even in my own state, I know that jury trials in many locations won't begin until mid 2021.
Hmm.
Even still, their courts are looking, regardless of when they begin, very, very targeted in person proceedings. They are looking for a way to streamline all of those
Yeah.
cases that have been backlogged, and actually to maintain the courtrooms as empty as possible,
Hmm.
so that people who really do need to be in there can attend and not be exposed to any kind of negative consequences such as a virus or something like that. um, I am curious though. There's how do we get the courts to actually switch their mind frame, their frame of mind, in terms of saying, hey, guess what, this isn't a question about, yes, you will save money, but this is really more of a question of providing better, faster language access, and complying with Title 6 regulations, and and being professionally responsible.
Yeah, it's a tough nut to crack, because first of all, the courts, really would appreciate it if they have interpreters, period. This idea of the quality has been a hard one to sell them. The idea for many judges to this day, I think, Johnny has been my interpreter for 20 years. I don't care if he
Yes.
can't pass the test, he's a good interpreter.
Right.
So we've been fighting that, and we hadn't won that battle yet. I think we had made a lot of progress. There's a lot of judges that now get it, and they're themselves demanding, oh no, I want a certified interpreter, I want to, etc. So we were getting there when this hit us, and now expediency has become an issue again. So we just need to keep on pressing. I think the more our interpreters are prepared to give reasons and not throw tantrums, to give reasons as to why doing it this way makes sense and why it's still important to, whether you're doing it Zoom or not, you still need a certified interpreter, because if not, like I said, the rule applies to everybody. Why have judges? We could just have a guy in a black robe in front of a television and do it by Zoom, and that's it. Obviously not, because they need to be prepared. They need to know what they're doing. They need to know the law. Same principle applies. So it's just for us to keep on pushing that. I think that it's time for our interpreters to give up the fight against the machine and accept the fact. And somebody said, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and I think I mentioned to you, I don't remember the author, but somebody said a few years ago that technology was not going to replace interpreters, but some interpreters were going to be replaced by other interpreters who use technology. So I think the important part of this process for us is to instead see it as an opportunity. And as interpreters, we're going to have to get prepared to be very proficient with this Zoom and Teams and whatever other platforms are there. I think it's going to be important. So we don't contribute to the idea that this is difficult or this is clunky, or this, to make it as seamless as possible, but to accept the fact it is a way to provide interpretation efficiently. People might say, being in person is much better. Maybe, and I agree with that in general. But if this is the new reality, why not make it the best possible use of the technology?
I completely agree with you, and I also like the quote that you mentioned earlier. I
Mhm.
did a little research, and the gentleman who said this quote, his name was Bill Wood, and he was
Bill
the
Wood,
founder
that's
of
right. Hmm.
DS Interpretation in San Francisco,
Hmm.
California. He
Hmm.
recently passed away, but he was a pioneer. He spent almost 40 years in
Yeah,
the industry, and he was right on the money.
yeah,
And it's interesting because this quote could be applied not originally I think, and I'm not in his mind, but originally there was a lot of fear about artificial intelligence
hmm,
and Google Translate and all these other technologies. Now we're really talking about another facet
that's right.
of those who will be replaced, or those who don't use technology. I find it interesting. We talked about it in a previous episode, how interpreting is a career that is often attractive to people who are in second or third careers, and that they
Yes,
have been doing other things before. But now, interestingly enough, in addition to that, it was always a career, to add to this, it was always a career that had a low barrier to entry
that's the problem.
technologically.
Hmm. Hmm.
You didn't have to be tech savvy to be an interpreter. You just had to be able to, you know, put two words, well, more than two words together, but
Hmm.
you really just had to have an ability to have that language and that those skills and that knowledge to be able to interpret in whatever setting you were. But all of that has changed. It's very interesting.
Yes, it has. And we we have to evolve with the time. It has to be. It has to be. But this is an opportunity. It really is. I think that uh, the little push that the courts needed to see that this is a actually applicable and useful technology is the opportunity to take it, seize it as interpreters, and say, I can become a global interpreter. I'm telling you, even though I always assumed that the people in other countries were much better interpreters, had a lot of training and whatever, that might be true for some parts of the EU. But when we were in Tennessee last year, we met this lady from Japan, I assumed Japan had like a super strong interpreter program in Japan, and found out they had nothing, no program, no certification, no, and they were looking at us, the United States,
Really?
to kind of, yes. And then I found out that even though we thought we were far behind, we're not that far behind in many aspects, and especially in court interpretation and medical interpretation. A lot of countries could use services from people who were trained here. So if you become a remote interpreter, sky's the limit. Now I understand many of us, some of my colleagues that do conferences are sad because they love the travel that comes with the conferences. And now that might not be the case anymore. So I understand. And when I mentioned earlier, if I'm the only certified Somali interpreter in the country, I love the idea of people paying me to go to their city for a couple of days to work 10 minutes and get paid real well. Sorry, right? But the truth is that if we really believe on the core of this, and I really do, our job is to provide a very important service to the courts, and that is to provide access to justice for people who otherwise wouldn't have access to justice. Period. That is, in my opinion, our main mission. Has always been my focus, and that's why in the institute we really focus more on improving the profession and the condition of the interpreters rather than just growing for the sake of growing. We are interested in access. I tell people, and I might have stolen this from Patricia, but having an interpreter is not a language right. Having an interpreter is an access right.
Absolutely.
And there is a very clear uh, path to think, well, having video is access, and we're part of that access.
So, as far as that access is concerned, um, I want to make sure that our listeners also don't think that because we focus on legal interpreting as kind of one of the things that we bring up a lot. I
Mhm.
guess that's our default position, both you
Yes,
and
it is.
I.
Hmm.
But it really has been it has been a game changer for
Sure,
medical interpreting. It has been a game changer for educational interpreting and other forms
sure.
of interpreting,
Conferences.
conferences as
Hmm.
well. Um, there is still, though, I would say, we did some forums here in Georgia at the beginning of the pandemic for a task force that was looking to return to the opening of the courts, and interpreters were unfortunately invited to participate in it.
Hmm.
And really, the main concern that the interpreters had wasn't that they wouldn't get work, was that all of a sudden, by opening it virtually, you would have interpreters that are being brought in from other states who were
Hmm.
not trained and who did not know Georgia, who did not know Georgia
Right.
law,
Yeah.
who did not understand our proceedings. In some places it's just simple thing. We call them solicitors here. Other places call them DAs or district attorneys or assistant district attorneys is
Yeah.
one of those things. At least in in the state court system, we call them solicitors as opposed to prosecutors. And so
Right.
just little things like that
Oh, I
actually
know.
make a
I mean,
difference.
yeah, Pennsylvania. It took me going to Pennsylvania a couple of times until I caught the word tip staff.
Oh, what is that?
Tip staff? Well, I figured tip has to do with like, what do we have to like tip out at the end of the day? We give $5 to this guy, and no, the tip staff is the what we would call in other places either the court deputies, the
Oh, okay.
marshals, or the bailiffs, depending on where you are.
I
They're
did
called
not know
tip
that.
staffs. And I was in Maine one time, and some attorney gave me the history of the tip staff, and that's because when they were looking for a jury for a trial in the 1800s, or maybe even early 1900s, um, the judge would ask the staff to take the people who take the staff, which, as we know, is a long, you know, what, like a scepter or something like that, a long pole with some
Mhm.
eagle on the top, and that's the staff. And they
Okay.
would go with that staff out, and they would tip it the people that they would choose, and they had to follow them, and that was the jury.
That
I
sounds
don't know
very
if it's
regal.
yeah, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a good story. And
It is.
according to that lawyer, that's where the tip staff came from, because you have the staff, you tip the people, and then I don't know if it's true or not, but yeah, so they're called tip staff. First time I heard it, I was tip staff. Who's that? So you're right. And again, us interpreters, instead of fighting these concepts, we have to say, well, again, it's an opportunity. You can say, with experience in this court, this other court, this other court, and it's always an opening for us to learn more. I understand people get territorial, and I especially understand if interpreters have been working as interpreters, making a living without any demands on them. And all of a sudden we come with, oh, I want you to take tests and that and that. And then people get even more territorial. I don't think it's going to be an issue if we're going to run out of work for interpreters. It's not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think. So it's a matter of just incorporating all the things that are around you to make yourself a better interpreter, to again be this conduit for access to justice.
Absolutely. One of the interesting things that we've come up here in Georgia, which is just more in its infancy, and I wonder what you think about it, is the idea of creating a video remote interpreting endorsement for certified and licensed interpreters, and it follows the model of court reporting, which is they
Yeah,
have in Georgia at least they have a category called real-time court
yeah,
reporting
or cards.
endorsement, and we thought, well, maybe this would be good. That way the courts that hire the interpreters actually know that the interpreters know how to use the technology, that they have
Right.
been trained in the protocols of online interpreting, which are somewhat different, and then
Sure.
the interpreters can then add something, another feather to their cap.
Absolutely. I think it's a fantastic idea. And again, if we as interpreters, and we go back to the group that is really interested in training, improving their performance, and the other group that just needs to know that and learn and come to the fold, because people sometimes, if they're not educated, they're working for a long time as interpreters. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying they still need to come and see what's an eye-opening experience it is to get trained and provide better services and to improve your performance. And that's the thrust of this idea that we're sharing right now.
Absolutely. Agustin, as always, the conversations with you are extremely interesting. We're out of time
Thank you.
again, so we will have to have you back
Sure.
very, very soon to talk about yet another aspect of interpreting that we wouldn't have thought would be important.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as time changes, everything just blows up.
Yeah. And thank you, Maria, again for jumping in and starting hosting for us again. I think this is going to be a fantastic uh, beginning of a continuation of a beautiful friendship. And um, just to tell everybody, it is an opportunity, and please let us know if you mentioned, let us know. Yes, let us know also topics that you would want to hear in subject to interpretation, or propose maybe somebody to work with us in subject to interpretation that we haven't thought about. Obviously, we stay completely away from religion and politics and whatever, but as far as interpretation goes, we really would like to know what is it that we can share with you to improve your performance and to improve your experience as an interpreter on any field.
Absolutely. And stay tuned as we move along.
Hmm.
We're in our episodes, we're going to start giving you recommendations for books and
Hmm.
other different practical tidbits that can be useful in enhancing your interpreting experience.
Right. And I don't want to leave without mentioning that this idea of a certification, or what is it called, an endorsement,
Yes, a
is
VRI endorsement.
it's a really good idea. I hope it works well for you, and then you can infect the other states into doing something similar. Uh, it is of the utmost importance for the end users, doctors, lawyers, judges, court systems, hospitals, to understand that their interpreters are a group of professionals that require training and other things, and that they make the effort, they invest the money, so they should reward them by actually giving them the jobs and the opportunities professionally that they deserve.
Absolutely, and I don't think this quote can be said too many times, especially in this time that we're living with COVID and the closing and slow reopening of courts and hospitals and businesses. Interpreters will not be replaced by technology.
Not
They will
anytime soon.
not anytime soon, and they will be replaced by interpreters who use technology.
That's true.
So we hope that we can be of service to you. Thank you, Agustin, for joining us
Thank you,
again and
Maria.
sharing your experiences and all of your activities, which have really, really helped promote the profession and bring professionalism and standards to our profession. Thank you very much for doing that, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you around. Come visit us anytime you want. You can visit us virtually.
We've recently added to our library of virtual offerings the State Exam Success Kit. This kit is a comprehensive tool for interpreters of all languages and levels to hone their skills and prepare for the State Court Oral Certification Program and the State Written Proficiency Exam. The kit is made complete by a series of informative videos that explain the exam process, expectations, and exam content, and provide helpful breakdowns of subjects and topics covered. Additionally, the kit also includes a set of carefully designed exercises that reinforce our intentional practice approach and the importance of honest self assessment to build your skill level as an interpreter. The kit is available in Spanish and English or in a language neutral format for interpreters of all languages. You can visit our virtual lab store at delamorainstitute.com/store to purchase. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this podcast has enriched your journey along this fascinating field of interpretation. Perhaps you've learned something new, remember something you had forgotten, or are now encouraged to try something different. If you're watching this on YouTube, please share your comments with us below. And if you're listening to us, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our weekly episodes. Take care.